Hello and welcome to Gardening with the Gals. I'm Rachel,
I'm Heather.
and today we are going to be talking about the basics of starting your garden. And Heather, I'd like to ask you, what tools do you think are necessary?
So the tools I think are really necessary are a trowel, a hoe, a watering can, or your watering hose, whatever you have handy. I have a water hose, and I just drag it through my backyard to my garden. Gloves, if you're like new dirt. Some people are. I don't wear them. Miss Rachel does. It's just your preference. Shears, so you can cut and trim things down if need be. A rototiller, if you have an open range garden or just a regular just in the ground garden, that is necessary. A rake, knife to cut things when you go to harvest, a basket or some kind of bag for harvesting. I use just like a basket or like a plastic grocery bag so I can just carry them in and not have to worry about it getting all myself. So that's what I use. So
Another option is you don't want to have to buy a watering can and make several trips to and from your hose, or you don't want to have to hold the hose for a certain amount of time. Another tip that you can use is just to buy a sprinkler and have it go off in your garden for 30 minutes, depending on how much water your plant needs, and then go from there.
And that too, with the sprinkler, you have to check how dry or how moist your soil is, because a water sprinkler will go sometimes back and forth or spin around, however type you have. So that's really important. You don't want to underwater, but you also don't want to overwater, because disease and rot can happen with either one, or dehydration can happen right there.
And in speaking of overwatering, underwatering, what soils are good and what absorbs too much water, too little water?
Okay, so here are our types of soil. Clay, sand, loam, which we really don't have around here, silt, peat, and chalk. So Indiana is really known for having a lot of clay and kind of denser dirt. It does soak up a lot of your water. So when you're in peak summertime, you really probably should garden once or twice a day. So about sunrise or before the sun gets too hot. Don't do it in the middle of the day because you may fry your plants. And then also when the sun's going down. So it's the same theory. You don't want to fry and frazzle your plants.
Actually, to get into a little bit of science for you science nerds out there, plants have something called a stomata, which opens and closes depending on where the sun is. So the stomata, if it's open, will bring in air or CO2, and it will bring it in to undergo photosynthesis, where that CO2 will then be turned back into oxygen and will also get sugars to break down for the plant to eat. During the day, the stomata is always closed, because if those open, then the sun will dehydrate the plant and cause them to die. So it's best to water your plants either in the early morning or late at night, where those stomatas are open. They're ready to take in water and CO2 in order to conduct photosynthesis, and that's their optimal growing and basically operation time.
Exactly. So the one thing I did see when doing a lot of research on soils and everything else, we are going to have a packet for you guys to come pick up. This has like pros and cons of different kind of things, different kind of gardening, and a couple other things I'm going to throw in for you is how to see and test your soil type. It's a really simple thing. You just need like a jar, mason jar, mayonnaise jar if you keep those, even just a big container. You can fill up with a good amount of dirt, and then the rest of the way with water. And the way you test it is to shake it and then use that chart I'm going to print out for you guys. I've got a pamphlet for it, for brochure, and it'll tell you kind of percentage and what kind of things you have in your dirt. So you could have a good mixture of different things. One thing I did see, if you kind of have a really moist um, dirt, peat moss will kind of help absorb that and balance that out. So if I'm wrong, sorry, but I'm pretty sure that's what I read.
And another thing is, if you're doing raised garden beds or container gardens, you will most likely buy your soil from a store. And a lot of those are typically, they're mostly like a loam. They're not heavy and super dense like a clay, but they're not real light and dry like a sand.
No.
So buying from a store, sometimes has additives like inorganic fertilizers, which we will talk about in a little bit, but usually those would be really good to use in your container gardens.
Mm-hmm.
I get mine from Lowe's because they have an awesome deal of like 2 bags for $10, but you can get them at Menards, at the local Ace Hardware
Mm-hmm.
here in town, and other local stores.
Right. So like for my container garden, my husband's a mechanic, so I got some used tires that they were just gonna throw out. So I use that as my containers, and I just plant. I usually do tomatoes, parsley. I did some peppers last year, and then I have a old cattle fence that is able to be bent, and it's for my green beans, which I grow Kentucky Wanderers, so they will vine instead of just laying like the Blue Lake bush beans. I do a couple bags of potting soil. Some people are like, no, don't do that. Me, I've always had very good luck with it because it does have that extra nutrients in it. It will soak up and hold the water and let go what it needs to let go of. I've always had really good luck with that. I rotate that out every few years and add it if it's gone down in my tires. I also always add a bag of fertilizer or compost to help get those plants rooted and started and give them a good boost of fertilization.
And if you're curious about learning more about container gardens or free range gardens, we will actually be talking about that in a later episode, either the next or the one after. But going back to nutrients in the soil, our next topic is fertilizers. And there's two kinds. There's organic, which consists of things like compost, depending on where you are. There's cow manure, things like rock phosphate, which is a natural ingredient. And also, you can use grass clippings or things like bone meal and blood meal and stuff like that. You typically have to find those at a all natural store. They're not found at a lot of local shops. But the easiest and cheapest would probably just be raking your yard after you mowed it and then tossing it in your garden. And inorganic is things like nitrogen fertilizers, phosphate, or potassium, and they all do different things. Nitrogen aids in plant growth, so making the plant grow taller or produce more fruit and things like that. The phosphate is slow acting, so you want to have phosphate fertilizer in your garden before you plant things so that it can break down and really get mixed in with that soil. And that will help not like help your plants grow at a normal rate.
Right.
So that way, if it's cold or maybe the weather is not optimal for a certain plant, that phosphate will help make sure that that plant's growth isn't stunted and you get really good yield for each year. And then potassium fertilizer help the plant grow stronger root systems so that they can reach down further, gather more water, and also have stronger stems, especially if it's like tomato plants. Those can get kind of flimsy that you'll want to cage, but that potassium can help those stand a little bit better on their own. Um, and you can use different things. One thing that I hear a lot of people suggest that is a natural way to have those added ingredients is to put your seeds in an empty eggshell and then plant it in that because the eggshell will break down and add calcium and other minerals like that for your plants.
Yeah, that's I know I have quite a bit of farmer friends. One of them he does use nitrogen in his corn or bean field. He'll use it either beginning of the season planting time, or he'll most likely I've heard him talk about using it in the middle so you can get that middle boost. You know, the time of summer when your corn is about 4th of July and it's definitely knee high over 4th of July. It's one of the old quotes. If it's not there yet or mid season of crop time, he will put nitrogen on there to give that extra boost. So it will get to full potential of your yield. So the other thing with, like she said, with the eggshells, a lot of people will save those. My in-laws save them and do their own compost pile, and there's a lot of eggshells that go into that, and that's a really good way to get a natural calcium intake for your plants.
Now, what fertilizers do you use? And do you prefer organic or inorganic, or do you use a certain way?
I use like a compost or manure fertilizer. I just get it in a bag from not Meyer, Menards or our local hardware store here in town. I just do that and I mix it in with my soil. I don't do any kind of like liquid fertilizer unless I have no need for that. I have a small garden, but that's what I like and use. It is something I can mix in every year. That's how I do it.
Do you have any suggestions for people who may have bigger gardens and what might be better for them to do in terms of fertilizers?
Um, Find a local farmer that has cows or horses or chicken. Chicken fertilizer smells awful, but it's fertilizer. And I'm sure they have a big pile of manure they would be willing to get rid of, and you can just put it in a hopper or whatever and spread it out that way, or just shovel it out and kind of even it out over your garden. I mean, most farmers don't want to keep manure around unless it's for their gardens or the fields, whatever. So
I do suggest that if you put manure in your garden, please wear gloves and ones that are either latex, not fabric, because there can be bacteria and things that soak through your gloves and could get into your skin. So please wear gloves or use tools.
use a shovel. That's what I would use. And if you do use a glove that has material fabric on it, you are going to get that smell because manure is not a very nice smell. I'm used to it, but a lot of people are very turned off by that smell and don't like it. So definitely the plastic and vinyl gloves are the way in your ticket to go if you're going to do it that way. So
And speaking of types of gardens, we're going to get into several different kinds,
mm-hmm.
and there are many options, which in the pamphlet that Heather
Mm-hmm.
displayed earlier in the video, that has a ton of options. There are
Yep.
ones you can do in a fallen tree, containers, free range. But today we're just going to be talking about general free range, which
Mm-hmm.
would require the rototiller, and general containers, whether it be box, tires,
Tires.
or anything else that you have. And Heather, I would like you to go through and kind of explain a little bit of each, things that maybe go
Mm-hmm.
along with the stereotype of each type of garden and things to expect.
Okay, so I do a container garden because I live here in town, and she does the container garden. She does it in boxes. I do it in tires because it's a free source for me, and the box she puts together is a fairly cheap source. You can also do garden containers in a 5-gallon bucket. You can do them in little pots or whatever, depending on what fruit or vegetable you're growing. You can do them in like that storage totes. You can do them in those. There's a lot of different things you can do them in storage and container wise. I just do the tires because it's free to me and I can put how much every dirt and control what goes in and out of it as compared to if I were living out in the country like I used to. We didn't have as much control what was going to go in and out unless we physically did it ourselves. I grew up with both type of gardens. I always had just the free range garden is what I kind of call it. That takes a lot more work, more patience, diligence, and time. So with the free range garden, you're gonna need a tiller or like a lot of people with a lot of shovels and hoes and rakes to plow up a good chunk of land for your fruits and vegetables, whatever you prefer to grow. You are gonna have to like pick out rocks continuously so you don't break your tiller, and your tiller will find those rocks. So you've got to pick those out of your garden. That was a discipline I had, as if you didn't go outside or whatever. You had to go pick weeds and you had to go pick out the rocks so you could retill and get that soil where you need it and want it. You have to constantly do weed control, and if not, you are just going to be bombarded by weed, and those weeds are going to take up all the nutrition, all the water that those plants you planted. It's just kind of a waste of money if you don't weed. It's okay to have weeds every now and then. It's good therapy to pull weeds at night, but if you want a good successful garden, keep up on the weed pulling continually. You can obviously get more product out of a free range garden. You can control what you put in, what you pick out with that on that theory. You can add all kinds of different things in one garden, just as long as you keep them separated or put the things that go together, and then things that don't go, you can put them on opposite ends or a couple different rows over. Because there's some plants that do well together and some that won't and will leach into each other and take each other's nutrients away. That's the pros and cons of basically having a free range garden. What are your thoughts?
I would agree with a lot of that. When I was younger, I grew up with a free range garden as well, and something that we did for weed control is, we rototilled
Mm-hmm.
first, and then we actually would put spikes to where we put seeds, so we understood like, okay, we can't cover that part, and we would use newspapers and things like that, like some stone to actually build a path so there was less space for weeds to
Mm-hmm.
grow. Um, we had one bed that was dedicated strictly to strawberries that we didn't worry about as much, and we put a border around those. I would also say that a con of free range gardens is you have to do something to keep pests out. One, I mean, time old trick is marigolds. Animals hate the smell of marigolds, specifically rabbits and deer. So if you live out in the country, marigolds are a really good resource to you. If you would like to put in more money and make it look a little more nicer, a fence would also work.
Yep.
I do suggest that if you do a fence, actually getting chicken wire and putting it underground so they can't dig up and underneath.
Another thing I did, not to cut you off, I did think about was a lot of those animals, those pests or whatever animals, dogs, squirrels, rabbits, the first instinct they do is they sniff the ground. So the one thing I learned with training my dog was that you can take some cayenne pepper and mix it with water and spray a border. So when they go to smell that border, they know that smells bad, that burns my nose. It's not going to hurt them. I promise it's not going to hurt them. And it will keep a good border, just spray it every few days or once a week. So that is a good border control as well. Another thing you can do to keep pests out is, especially birds. Birds like to pick at young, maturing fruits and vegetables and eat them. You can take a stake and a just simple aluminum pie pan, put a hole in it, and then tie like a piece of yarn or string or twine around it and have it tied to that pole or stake, whatever you have to put in the ground, and it's a noisemaker and it scares off the birds and some other pests that will enter your garden. So while she's away, I'm going to talk about more container gardens. I do the entire container garden. I do, like I said, I do the green beans, the tomatoes, I do parsley, I have some other herbs. I also just pitch my pumpkins out there if I have the room every year, and then I also put in tomatoes and peppers. I can control that a lot easier than as I would with a open range, old school kind of garden technique. I usually go every few days and go outside and pick the weeds out, and just keep an easy maintenance like that. And I also do keep the kind of like the noisemaker inside of my area that I have my green beans on, because it keeps the birds away, because I would have birds eating the blooms or the newly matured vegetables I had. So
I have blueberries in my gardens, and we actually constructed a cage with some netting around it that we would just flip open when we were ready to harvest, and that net would keep birds from eating those.
Absolutely, which is a great idea. I'm going to have to add a door to my green bean enclosure because we have neighborhood cats that like to use it as a litter box. So I told them about using a mix of water and cayenne pepper as a border, because some of those pests' first instinct is to sniff and they don't like that smell. It's not going to hurt them, but that's how I learned to train my dog for his borders around our house.
Interesting. I've never heard of that trick. Another thing for smaller pests like beetles and bugs is things like rock salts, or something, if you prefer, like you want to keep your garden strictly organic, no chemicals, there is something called diatomaceous earth, which is a really fine powder that you definitely don't want to sniff. It won't hurt you. It's just got very small crystals that will kind of, like if it's a worm crawling, it will just scratch their underbelly and it will really bother them with that. And so it'll deter them from going near your plants if that's there, because they don't want to have to trudge over all that just to get on the leaf.
Definitely. You want earthworms in your garden, just a preference.
Yes.
We want the earthworms. They are good for cultivating and digging and sifting your soil for you, so you don't always have to. So I don't think she meant earthworms. She meant like grubs and like the caterpillars and everything that gets in your garden that eats your leaves.
Yes, I apologize. But yes, earthworms are a great resource. If you compost to make your own soil additive, earthworms are great for actually basically digesting all of that and helping turn it all into soil. And those earthworms are your friends for sure.
Yes.
But we will get into pests and natural fertilizers and little garden helpers in a later video. Next time we will talk about planning what to plant exactly in your garden. And we also talk about starting your garden and how to get those seeds ready, or how to, if you want to grow them indoors or outdoors, we'll talk more about that as well.
Well, I'm Miss Heather. This is Miss Rachel. I hope you enjoyed talking with us, the gardening gals. And if you guys have any questions or whatever, let us know. We are a wealth of knowledge, and if we don't know it, the Google knows it. So,
Yes,
do you have anything else to say?
I would just like to say, please feel free to join us next time you're in, and next time we post a video. And we have a free seed catalog. Please feel free to come in and look at those, ask any questions. We'd be happy to give you a copy of that pamphlet from earlier to help you decide what kind of garden to grow. And if you guys would like to research more on your own, there are many wonderful videos and websites to help you get started.
Absolutely.
As she said, we are the Gardening Gals, and please join us next time.
All right, bye guys.